This is 1 in 44, a presentation of Anderson Center for Autism. 1 in 44 is a weekly show devoted to autism spectrum disorder.
Good morning and welcome to 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer at Anderson Center for Autism. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Alex. I'm going to get your name hopefully right. Alex Prizgintas?
That was excellent.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I didn't completely mess it up. Alex is joining us to talk about, I think, a lot of things. And I appreciate that you reached out to us. I know that you lecture. I know you're an author. I know you're an incredible musician. You're a historian. So I would love to just invite you to jump into your story wherever you want to start and start telling us about yourself and your passions, and we'll go from there. I may pepper in some questions.
Sure, of course. You mentioned a great term, I think, starting off first, and that was my passion for listening and learning about the stories of our region, as well as sharing them with the regional public. Mm-hmm. One of my earliest memories that I like to share involves another aspect that complements my position on the autism spectrum, which is my synesthesia. And for those with a general description of synesthesia, it's the crossing of the nerves inside. So certain, for instance, sequences get corresponded to colors. For instance, I have perfect pitch, so every note has a corresponding color. But synesthesia also works when driving, almost creating a virtual roadmap in my head to help with memorization. And one of my earliest memories is driving with my father to a preschool that was probably about a 15-minute drive from me, and immersing myself in the geography of the region on those drives. I can vividly remember, in fact, my father and I both driving and naming every street along the way, every street sign. And so that really was the first step in implanting an interest in the region. And as you said, first, through objects. I am, as of 2021, a undergraduate student at Marist College, graduated December 2021. I had a major in history with a minor in Hudson River Valley Studies and public history, graduated summa cum laude. But prior to being a historian, I was really fascinated in the objects, and I do like to consider myself first and foremost a collector. In fact, the audience won't see, but in the background, you can see some of my railroad library on a display.
I can see that.
Yes. There are different other genres I collect. Some of my more prominent topics are dairy farms, historical dairy farms and milk bottles from Orange County.
Milk bottles, right. Yes.
As well as regional railroad history and items from the Sullivan County and Ulster County, I should mention, Borscht Belt Catskill hotels. In fact, a museum is opening for that in Ellenville, New York, and I am on their advisory board.
Oh, very cool.
So all of these items were really aspect of my early realm in connecting. There's a lot of people I have to thank for that in supporting me, for most importantly, my parents, both my mother and father, who at an early age embraced how I was as an autistic child. They admittedly both supported and celebrated who I was and never sought to change that. They tossed a lot in my direction in the hopes of finding what might flourish. And with that knowledge, they were very thankful in supporting me with opportunities, books, projects, travel, and of course, the artifacts that helped me to create who I am. Yes.
I want to interrupt you just for a second. We have a little bit of a crossover between the two of us. So my grandfather was a musician, and he played at some of the hotels up in the Catskills.
Oh, wonderful.
Yep. In the probably, I'm guessing the 40s, no, maybe earlier, the 30s. And he and my grandmother met on a trip up there from Brooklyn. She was a governess and he was going up to be in the band. And my father, one of my favorite things to do with my dad when I was young, and something he did with, he's done with his grandchildren, is find and collect bottles of all kinds in the woods of Orange County, where I grew up in New York, and also up in this area in Ulster County and Dutchess County. So as you're talking, you're already bringing just personal memories to my mind. So I hope that that's happening for some of our listeners as well. Continue, please.
Some connections. I see you're an Orange County resident as well, locally. So as I stated early on, really first and foremost, I was a collector. In many ways, this was an escape from what I consider to be a turbulent environment. One of the early aspects to that, which I still enjoy, is I have a train layout in the other room. And it was almost an escape for me, especially during my elementary and middle school years, which is with certain aspects of my autism where I struggled at times. And I think decoding facial cues mostly during the time was a challenge. In some ways, though, it kept me clear of silly situations that many teens might experience. I tend to be more pragmatic and practical, so I seek solutions for immediate and long-term problems without getting too tied into emotional issues, as of course the train room was a way for me to release any excess energy come from the day. Just a air of relaxation. Music, which we can get into later, is also a source. Understanding facial cues and getting bogged down with some social matters tend to not necessarily impact me as much. I understand it might make me seem aloof and uninvolved, but it really keeps me distant from the vicissitudes of daily life. And though, yes, I easily get lost in my working world, my father often says that I act like a true New Yorker and I can be in the midst of millions, but yet alone, but not lonely so much in terms of being not around a lot of people, but simply alone in my work and passions.
Great. Your dad sounds like he really is. You guys have spent a lot of time together.
Yes, we most certainly have. In fact, in my current musical tour, where I go to many different organizations, libraries, and assisted living facilities, he is my very supportive roadie.
Oh, excellent. That's great.
Thank you.
So you talk about the train being sort of an escape from a turbulent environment. I think that's something that a lot of listeners and a lot of people can relate to, probably whether they're on the autism spectrum or not. I think people, generally speaking, look for some way to release that buildup of whether it's anxiety or just social pressures, or a way to kind of let loose. As you've grown up, because you talked about doing that as an elementary school age person, and now you're an adult. So as you've grown up, has your experience what you're feeling when you're in that room, decompressing would be what I would call it, maybe. Has that feeling changed and evolved, or is it very reminiscent of how you used to feel when you were a younger kid?
There are still some reminiscent aspects, but I do certainly think it's evolved since I particularly graduated from high school. I have been in certain situations that have allowed me to understand the intricacies of society better. I'd like to provide two examples. One being very broad, my experience at Marist College. I was a commuter student, currently now being a master's of public administration student. I'm online, but commuting to college from the Central Valley to Poughkeepsie allowed me to essentially open up more from what was originally more of a closed off atmosphere. And that allowed me to almost in a way exemplify some freedom within my work. Complementing that, for 2 years, I served as the president of the Hudson Valley Bottle Club. That was from 2018 to 2020, which is a really neat story of how that began as well. Much earlier on, this was probably 4 years before then, I attended an auction in Montgomery, New York, in Orange County to bid on a few milk bottles from Port Jervis. This was when my milk bottle collection was still relatively minor. And there were two individuals that were bidding on the same lot. And when they noticed at that time I was in 8th grade, a little younger, they chose to back away. What ended up happening is one of the individuals wanted some bottles in this particular lot that were not what I wanted. So a trade was worked out. And the other individual at the time was the president of the Hudson Valley Bottle Club and brought me into their organization. And being the president of an organization like that and taking the lead for 2 years allowed me, again, to learn many aspects of interacting with society, with members, as well as coordinating a yearly event. We had the Hudson Valley Bottle Show that would be the third Sunday of every August in Poughkeepsie, New York. And now, actually, just as a few weeks ago, in April, I was elected as president of my town's historical society, the Woodbury Historical Society, so I can continue to evolve and develop those skills.
Congratulations! That is quite a story and a couple of great examples. I read that there's a lot. I want to put out there that there's a lot on your website. So could you take a second and just give the name of your website for any listeners who want to dive into this a little further after the program's over?
Certainly. My website is just my name, alexprizgintas.com. Would you like me to spell it out?
Sure, you might as well.
Sure. So Alex, P as in Peter, R-I, Z as in zebra, G as in George, I-N, T as in Thomas, A, S as in Sam. And on my website, you will find a great deal of material that shows my work as a historian, a lecturer, and a musician, as well as my press releases, my published works as an author, and various different videos of my musical compositions and renderings.
I think it's a great website. It's full of information. I checked it out. And so I think I would just definitely follow that up with, if you're a person who is autistic, if you are raising a loved one on the spectrum, but also if you're very into music, history, bottles, collections, and just reading a really great story about you, Alex, from when you were very young to where you are today. There's something there for everybody. So, and also ways to contact you. I know I saw that as well.
Thank you.
So quick question for you, definitely off the subject, but you mentioned Central Valley. I'm wondering if you're a graduate of Monroe Woodbury High School.
Yes, I am.
So am I.
Wonderful.
So we're both Crusaders, but obviously at different times. I'm just a bit older than you, but it's really interesting to me that again, I know just from growing up in that area how rich it is, and some of my high school friends that I still am connected to through social media go hiking in the same areas we used to when I was growing up, and still find bottles and post them today. And it's I recall it being just a really rewarding experience, because what I remember anyway, the way I did it was that you went in kind of with the hopes that you would find something, but it immediately was an adventure where you could find nothing, you could find something amazing, you could find a bunch of the same ones that kind of tell a story. And so I really appreciate you sharing this today, because I knew you'd be a very interesting person. I wasn't aware that we were going to have all this sort of background in common. So that's very cool. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I want to ask you specifically about those stories behind objects, and a little bit more about your music and why you choose to put yourself out there and lecture, and what your hopes are and plans are for the future.
Forward to it. Thank you.
All right. This is 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozinski, and we'll be right back.
If I could be you.
And you could be me.
For just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
It's been said that when someone you love has Parkinson's, you have Parkinson's. The Parkinson's Foundation knows that the disease doesn't just affect the diagnosed. It affects everyone who supports and helps care for them.
If you or someone you know is living with Parkinson's, a neurological disease that affects movement, we understand that it can be difficult to know where to find help.
If you have questions, the Parkinson's Foundation has answers. Answers for everyone in the fight.
We can help you understand the disease.
Help you find expert care and local support.
Give you tips for living a better life.
And share the latest research.
Find your answers and join us in the fight against Parkinson's.
To learn more, please go to parkinson.org.
Or call 1-800-473-4636.
That's 1-800-473-4636. The Parkinson's Foundation. Better lives together.
And now, 1 in 44 continues on 100.7 WHUD. This is a weekly community affairs program presented by the Anderson Center for Autism.
Welcome back to 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozinski, and I'm talking with Alex I'm going to mess it up this time. Alex Prizgintas. All right. And Alex has been you've been sharing a lot about your passions, your collections, your experience growing up on the autism spectrum, and sort of how that affected you, and maybe you made some choices about certain ways of coping with situations that may have felt overwhelming. So I appreciate all of that. We kind of left things with your entree now as a young adult into leading these organizations that are all about, history, local history, coinciding with your educational degree. So there's something on your website that I read a few times, which is story behind object. And I love story. In my work, it's all about being able to help somebody connect to the work we do at Anderson by way of stories about what goes on here every day. So for you, can you give an example or just talk about what that phrase means to you and why it's important?
I most certainly can. I think the best way to do that would be in describing an aspect of my collection we've discussed before, and that is milk bottles.
Yeah.
After collecting at this point would have been for probably about 3 to 4 years, I gave my first iteration of what's now one of my more popular topics, Orange County's dairies and their milk bottles. That was back in 2015 for the Hudson Valley Bottle Club. And when I gave that lecture, the important thing to note, it was based solely on the bottles themselves, with no other background of the history. And for the audience of mostly bottle collectors, that worked very well. But as I started to debut this lecture in other settings, such as historical societies and regional organizations, it became apparent that I needed to learn more about the history behind these objects, as you stated. And what really delved into was a research, in this case, behind Orange County's history of marketing, shipping, and producing fluid milk, and led to some really breakthrough discoveries for my own research and what later be others. For a few examples, in the spring of 1842, Orange County was the first place in the country where milk was shipped by rail to New York City. We were some of the earlier locations for early milk bottle uses during the late 1870s and early 1880s. Some other important products in the dairy world, like Philadelphia cream cheese and the Velveeta and Liederkranz brands of cheese, were also invented in Orange County. And by the 1880s, total, including dairy farms and others, we had over 4,000 operating in Orange County. So in really defining the stories behind these objects, yes, I started as a collector. Almost just, I wouldn't call the word hoarder necessarily, but it was almost a game, you could say. And now when I find objects, it's more of a mystery and a story behind, really looking into the hands that touched and used these artifacts from the past and trying to tease out the stories from that past.
That's really cool. Great explanation, Alex. Thank you. And it's really great to hear that what started for you with one purpose or an initial purpose has now expanded and kept you focused and interested, and also expanding that knowledge to all these places and people that you're speaking to. Which brings me to my next question, which is, in addition to milk bottles of Orange County and this area, and the history of those, what other, I guess, either what topics do you lecture on otherwise, and also why? Why do you feel that it's important to share what you're passionate about and what you know with other people?
That's a wonderful question. So my topics for lectures tend to evolve. They evolve in somewhat of an organized fashion over time. Some of my more popular topics are, of course, in the glass world. I do, of course, dairies and milk bottle of Orange County, New York. But on the same subject, I also do a program on the Ellenville Glass Works, which was once a prominent industry on the border of Orange and Ulster counties, which in the 1880s employed over 700 people. And I also have another lecture that fits almost in between, called The Art of Bottle Detecting, which I do with my father in tandem. And with those, we just bring a variety of all different kinds of antique bottles. And we go through 18 questions with the audience to figure out methods of how to better date and identify your antique glass. I also do a great deal of lecturing on local railroads. One of my more popular is on Edward Henry Harriman's Incline Railway. Harriman, of course, was a railroad tycoon that passed away in Orange County in 1909, and his home, Arden House, is still located between Central Valley and the village of Harriman, which is named after him. That tends to be a more popular example, as it is, you could say, one of the more overlooked incline roads in the Hudson Valley compared to the other two popular lines, which would have been Mount Beacon in Beacon, New York, and the Otis elevating incline railway near Tannersville, New York. Mm-hmm. Another area I'm also getting interested in is early settlers of the Hudson Valley, and that was actually with my more recently published works in the New York Archives magazine on Louis Moses Gomez and the Gomez Mill House, which is considered to be the earliest Jewish settlement in America, located along the borders of Orange and Ulster counties. Technically in Marlborough, actually a town in Newburgh, because it's on the Orange County side. But again, that's a really interesting story. Not only analyzing Gomez's story originally from Spain, fleeing from the Spanish Inquisition and then coming to New York between 1700 and 1705, but also viewing how his home has evolved through 3 centuries of history.
Very interesting. I like that. I appreciate you sharing this sort of how these are organically created, these new topics. The idea of sitting, in a lecture with you and your dad, going through those 18 questions is really fascinating to me. Again, I think in part maybe because it makes me think of times when I was younger hiking with my dad. I grew up right near Harriman. I grew up in Tuxedo, so right down the
Wonderful.
street. That was our hiking go-to location. So anybody listening, if you have not heard of Harriman State Park or that area, check it out. It's absolutely gorgeous. There's a ton of places to go and explore. There's beautiful lakes, but also a tremendous number of trails, some more traveled and some less traveled. So I think you can get a little bit of whatever you're looking for. All right. One thing we haven't really touched on, and we're down to the last just about 4 or 5 minutes of our interview today, Alex, is music. You said earlier that that you have perfect pitch and that every sound that you hear is associated with a color that you see. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. So I have heard that, not often, but I've heard that from a couple of other people that I've had the pleasure of speaking to, that sense that, or that the fact that colors take on, or sounds take on a specific color. When did music enter your life? And I know you play cello and piano, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you enjoy it? Is it a competitor to the history and the bottle, the bottle collecting, or is it, how do you work those two things together in your life?
Sure. So music has always been a part of my life. Both my parents are musicians by trade. My mother actually taught in the Munro-Woodbury system for over 30 years.
Cool.
In terms of being I like your use of the word a competition with history. I would not say that at all. Music for me, much as in the model train room I discussed earlier, is more of a release for me than a focus. And at this current time, it's actually proving to be quite a useful means of generating business.
Yeah.
Over time, I both classically trained, as you mentioned, on the piano and the cello, but particularly with the cello, I like to push the limit of the instrument, and recently I've been doing that by adding 2 particular tools. One is a Boss RC300 looping station, which can allow me to record tracks both in advance as well as to record tracks live, almost like a one-man show. If you've seen any popular bands, especially guitar players in particular, they often use looping stations in their performances. Also, much like guitar players, I also incorporate guitar effect pedals into the cello. So I use a distortion pedal, a delay pedal, and the iconic wah-wah pedal from 1960s and 70s rock and roll bands. And so through that, I've developed a program called Bach to Rock. It's my main foundation program among many others now that was started towards the end of 2021. And at the time, I was hoping for maybe 2 or 3 bookings a month at different locations, whether they be libraries, assisted living facilities, or other organizations. Now, since then, expanded to an average of 2 to 3 a week, with some weeks having even 4. My goal in 2022 was for 60 bookings, and I actually ended that year with 72. This year's goal is 100, which means that each quarter I need 25 bookings, and so far the first 2 quarters have 25 each. We're actually exceeding that. I believe I'm now between 85 and 90 for the year. So I'm currently taking advanced bookings up to December, and I hope that I'll exceed that goal of 100 events.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's going to sound silly after all these connections, but I also come from a family of musicians and very musically inclined people. My dad was also a music teacher for most of his career until he became a school administrator. Excuse me. So I wonder if I just keep thinking there's maybe some connection there that, we can keep mysterious for now, but it's just a very cool thing to think about. For our listeners, I want to draw your attention again to Alex's website. It's Alex Prizgintas, Prizgintas. And check it out. You have a lot of YouTube videos up there. And a lot of information about how to contact you regarding bookings, both for musical performances as well as lectures. I listened to a couple of the Bach to Rock. I looked it up myself. It's really just wonderful music. And I always appreciate anybody who's got talent like yours, who's willing to share it with the world, because I think music is an incredibly important part of so many of our lives, because it does provide that something else for that part of our brains that doesn't get it from other places. It can be soothing, it can be inspiring, it can evoke memories. And your music certainly did that for me. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And let's help Alex get to at least his 100 goal for this year.
Thank you.
Bookings.
And if anyone has any general questions about my experiences or my work, you're more than welcome to reach out through those means as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Fabulous. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show today and telling your story and sharing a little bit more about yourself with our listeners. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. This is 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and remember, Anderson cares.
You've been listening to 1 in 44, a weekly presentation of the Anderson Center for Autism. Join us for another edition of the show at this time next weekend.